This is how I turn this into this. You'll need about 10 pounds of tomatoes. I prefer Romas for their flavor and low moisture content, but you could use any tomato. Wash the tomatoes thoroughly. 10 pounds makes about 18 to 20 cups when chopped and seeded. There's no right or wrong way to cut up the tomatoes. I start by cutting them in half perpendicular to the core. This makes it easy to squeeze the seeds out. You can see how clean and easily the seeds are removed this way. Romas and other paste tomatoes usually have 2 to 3 well-defined seed chambers, making seed removal a breeze versus other types of tomatoes. Next, I cut off the core end and then cut those halves into quarters or smaller, depending on the size of the tomato. In the end, I want pieces that are less than a cubic inch in size. After breaking the peppers down into smaller pieces, I run them through a food processor. I pulse them a few times until there are no more large pieces. After peeling, I cut the white onions into smaller chunks and run them through the food processor to obtain about the same consistency as the peppers. I slice fresh jalapeno peppers into rings. This amount will make a medium salsa. You can use more or less depending on the amount of heat you desire. The chunkiness of my recipe mainly comes from the tomatoes and the jalapenos. Once the cloves are peeled, I chop them up with a hand chopper. You can also use a garlic press, but I prefer the size and texture produced by the hand chopper. All of the vegetables used in this salsa were grown in my backyard garden. If you're curious what that garden looks like, check out my garden video tour. A link to it can be found in the video description. The smoked Anaheim peppers are the secret ingredient that takes this salsa to another level. This would still be a great salsa without them, but if you can get them, they are a game changer. I smoked these in my offset smoker using mesquite wood. These were not completely dried, which is why I froze them. I also make dried shelf-stable smoked peppers. Either type adds an incredibly rich smoky flavor to not only salsa, but especially chili, other soups, and stir-fries. The sugar counters the acidity of the vinegar on the palate. Again, you can add more or less to your taste. Continue to cook the salsa on medium-high while stirring occasionally. I add tomato paste to thicken up the salsa. I'm using an organic commercial canned paste here, but I do make my own paste at the end of the growing season if I have a bumper crop. I prioritize making salsa, tomato soup, sauce, and marinara. This year was a bumper crop, so I made paste a few weeks after I shot this video. At this point, I sometimes add a handful of chopped fresh cilantro and a tablespoon of cumin. Some batches I'll leave plain and then season it when I open the jar. This allows you to experiment with spice combinations on smaller quantities without worry of spoiling an entire batch. Even though the vinegar in this recipe provides enough acid to make the salsa safe for canning, I add lemon juice anyway. I find that it doesn't alter the salsa flavor at all, and I like having the additional peace of mind that the acid level is high enough for safe canning. Make sure your lemon juice is hot before you add it to the hot jars. If you add cold liquid to a hot canning jar, it will crack the jar. Ladle the hot salsa into the hot jars. Leave at least a ½ inch of headspace between the rim of the jar and the salsa. For me, that means the salsa should just come in contact with the bottom edge of my funnel. Keep stirring the pot every so often while filling the jars. If you follow the recipe in the video description, it will make about 7 to 8 quarts. I actually made a larger batch, which is why I have over 11 jars here. The jar rims must be clean in order to make a good seal. Wipe each jar rim with a damp paper towel to remove all food residue. Finger tighten the rings so they are snug. You don't want them too tight. Air needs to be able to escape from the jars in order to create the vacuum seal. I have my water bath canner on medium just to keep the water hot but not boiling. I've broken jars by both putting them in water that is too cold and too hot. Once the jars are in the pot, I turn the heat up to my induction range's power boil setting. When I have a rolling boil, I turn the heat down to medium-high and then start the timer. After 45 minutes, I turn off the heat, remove the lid, and let the jars sit for 5 more minutes before removing them from the canner. Remove the jars and allow them to sit undisturbed for 24 hours. The lids should pop and seal, usually within minutes, but sometimes it can take up to an hour or more. If a jar doesn't seal, you can try reprocessing it, or you can place it in your refrigerator to be used within a few days.